Accessing David Icke, former television broadcaster, public speaker, author of 10 books, researcher and truth seeker. An 11-year quest to unveil the hidden history of mankind. Mission objective, to share information for human evolution.
Out of this black hole of official suppression has come an increasing focus by open-minded researchers on the endless ancient texts, accounts, legends all over the world of extraterrestrial gods who came from the sky and infused advanced knowledge into human society, and how those gods interbred with humanity, creating hybrid bloodlines. Conventional history even says that Sumer was the cradle, or one of them, of modern civilization. And these texts tell in astonishing detail of how an extraterrestrial race of gods, which they call the Anunnaki, which in Sumerian means those who from heaven to earth came, arrived on the earth, ruled ancient society, and interbred with humanity. And fascinatingly, the texts describe how these hybrid people, created by the interbreeding, were put into the positions of ancient, ruling, royal power. Now this is the true origin of the so-called divine right of kings, the divine right to rule by your bloodline.
Okay, we're here today with controversial author David Icke. Thank you for being with us today.
Pleasure.
David. David, you had a massive spiritual transformation that's changed your life in incredible ways back around 1986. Would you please share with us your experiences at that time?
Well, it was a transformation experience, that's for sure, but all through my life I rejected religion, and also rejected the idea that this world is all there is, and we're just a cosmic accident, the general scientific view. But I'd never really looked for the alternative. I was getting on with my life and television and all that stuff, like you do. But towards the end of the 80s, I started to have some strange experiences. And it culminated really in 1990, when I had this feeling there was this presence around me. When I was in a room, like a hotel room working for the BBC on my own, it was like someone else was there. And one day, not long after this, while this was going on, I was with my son, who's now a teenager, in days, kind of 18, and we were playing soccer on the seafront at Ryde in the Isle of Wight, where I lived. And when we finished, we were going to have some lunch at one of these Greasy Joe cafes on the railway station, right on the seafront. And when I got there, the railway worker came up to me and wanted to talk to me about soccer, So we were chatting away, and when we'd finished, I realized my boy Gareth was not around, and I knew where he'd be. He was in the newsagent, the news shop on the station, reading the books. So I walked in, and there he was. And I said to him, because the Greasy Joe cafe was full, "Come on, Gareth, we'll go up in the town and get something to eat." And as I turned, it was like two magnets were holding my feet to the ground. At this time, I'm just a television presenter. I'm presenting news and sport and stuff. And this was the start of the change. And I went to turn, and my feet wouldn't move. And I don't hear voices or anything like that. I just follow my intuition, my instincts, which have become stronger and stronger as the years have unfolded. But at that time, in this awakening, if you like, conscious awakening, I heard three voices, very clear, and this was the first. It said, "Go and see the books on the far side." And I'm thinking, who said that? So I went over there, just out of intrigue, like interest, what is going on here? So I walked across to look at the books, and this bookshop in that area sells things like, we call them Mills and Boon. They are novels about perfectly formed English roses who have wonderful relationships with perfectly formed uniformed soldiers, really riveting stuff. So I'm thinking, what am I going over here for? But when I got there, in among that lot was this book with a lady's face on the front. And I was kind of drawn to it. So I picked it up and turned it over, and I saw the word psychic on the back. This is a book by a healer, a spiritual healer, who is a psychic. And we're all psychic, a conscious psychic. And so I thought, I wonder if she would pick up what this thing is I'm feeling around me. So you feel a bit of a Burke at that time, don't you? So I didn't say I've got this presence around me or anything like that. I said I had arthritis, genuinely true. And I wasn't going to take drugs for it. So I wrote to her to see if she could give me some spiritual healing, right? That was my kind of in. But what I thought was, I want to see if she picks this up. So I went to see her. And first 2 visits were like hands-on healing, and we chatted about other dimensions and stuff like that. I'm getting really interested in this because it makes total sense. And then on the 3rd visit, I'm lying there, minding my own business, and she's doing this healing, right? And suddenly I felt like a spider's web on my face. Now this really started to make me take interest, because I'd read in a book that when she said other dimensions, other spirits, as she put it, want to connect with you, you sometimes feel a spider's web like feeling on your face. Well, funnily enough, I've never felt it since, just on that one occasion. So I'm like, oh my goodness me, it's the spider's web. And I tell you, I never said a word to her because I'm just thinking, I'm going to keep quiet about this for a minute. About 10 seconds, 15 seconds later, she kind of leapt back with her head and she said, oh my God, I've got to close my eyes for this one. Which is 1990, March 1990. And now my ticker's going in it. I'm thinking, what's the going on here? You know? And she said, I'm seeing a figure, she said. And this figure's asking me to tell you things. So I'm just going to pass on what I'm being told. And it said that I had been led there not to be healed, but to be contacted. That they knew they wanted me to, I knew I wanted them to contact me, but the time wasn't right until now. Now, that was interesting, because one thing I hadn't told her is that one time in a hotel room with this presence around me, which was getting me seriously pissed, I actually sat there and said, for goodness sake, if you're there, contact me, because you're driving me up the wall. And she referred to that without any idea that it had happened. And then she said that she was being told that I was going to go out on a world stage, be world famous. I was going to travel the world, and I was going to reveal knowledge that had been suppressed. A gigantic shadow had to be lifted from the planet, and the time had come to do it. That I would write 5 books in 3 years, which on this subject would sound ludicrous at the time. Getting 5 books published in 3 years is difficult enough. On a subject I knew nothing about at the time, it happened to the month. That there was going to be tremendous changes in the world. There was going to be a massive consciousness shift in which humanity would go onto a much higher level of understanding of who it was and what the world was really about. That there would be great earthquakes and earth changes, that the seas would rise, and that there would be a massive, massive transformation. And that I was going to go out world stage and talk about this. And interesting, given what started to unfold, is that I would face enormous opposition. But they, whoever they were, would always be there to protect me, and the opposition would never prevail. And so it went on. And a stream of things. One line that always stuck in my mind was, one man cannot change the world, but one man can communicate the message that will change the world. So, from that point, I started writing a book about my experiences. It was called Truth Vibrations. And of course, when it came out, I got massive ridicule in Britain, because I was well known as a television presenter. I was on the front of all the tabloid newspapers. You know, Ike's gone mad. I actually couldn't walk down any street in Britain for 2 years without being laughed at by most of the people in the street. It was extraordinary. There was one occasion I got so fed up with it, because it wears you down after a while. What it did then, I'm a much different character now. And I got in my car to drive out of this particular city to get away from it all. And I stopped at the traffic lights, and I looked across, and the family in the next car were laughing at me. I would go home, I'd put the television on. A comedians only had to mention my name, and they got a laugh. They didn't have to add anything to it. And so it was a time which set me free from the fear of what other people thought, and set me free of being anything but me. And of course, without that amazingly powerful experience, I couldn't possibly be talking about shape-shifting reptilians now, because the reason A lot of people who know about it never talk about it because they're terrified of the reaction of people when they talk about it. So because I was set free by that enormous ridicule, I'm now able, you know, in a very comfortable way to talk about this stuff. Because our lives are a series of links in the same chain. They are not disconnected events. And when I look back, my experience up to this point has given me everything I need to do what I'm doing. But the biggest change, the biggest moment that I can focus on that really moved me out of being a television presenter and, you know, a television presenter, all that stuff, into what I am now, happened in Peru, because after the manuscript for The Truth Vibrations was finished and it went off to the printers, I got this overwhelming feeling, this is early 91 now, to go to Peru. Now, what do I want to go to Peru for? I mean, you know, I've never been to Peru. I don't know anything about Peru. Go to Peru, go to Peru. And I bumped into this psychic lady, and, you know, she said to me, you ever thought about going to Peru? What? Not you at all. So I end up going to Peru purely on intuition, instinct, go to Peru. Well, a lot of amazing things happened, which we haven't got time to talk about now. Daily, it was extraordinary. The key moment came when this Peruvian guy that was taking me around Peru, he booked us in this hotel at a place called Puno in southern Peru, not far from Lake Titicaca, the highest navigable lake in the world, and also masses of stories of UFO activity around there, funny enough. I mean, when you go to Peru, and the tourist guides, they don't say, oh, this is where some people say they see UFOs. It's actually, you know, this is where the UFOs come down. I mean, everyone sees them. You know, it's incredible. Anyway, this hotel was called the Siyustani, and it was named after an Inca site about an hour and 15 minutes drive away. They call it a burial site, but, you know, conventional archaeology, whenever they see two ancient stones on top of each other, it's a burial site. You know, it can never be anything else. Oh, it's two stones on top of each other. They must have buried people here, you know. I never think about anything else. You know, God save us from academics. But anyway, so I'm looking at the pictures of this Inca site, because it's all around the hotel for obvious reasons. I said to the guy, I don't want to go there. He said, oh, we can't go there. There's no tourist buses this time of year. I said, I've got to go there. So I hire one. I hire this little tourist bus. Cost me a fortune with a tourist driver, and me and the guide in the back. We go off to this place. And it's a beautiful place. It's like a big hill with a lagoon on three sides and all the Inca ruins on the top. And I go there, and the only people there, because it's a completely uninhabited area, the only people there are a couple of kids with a llama for the tourists that actually weren't there except me. So and I spent some time there, and it was nice. It was very nice. But then when we got into the little bus to go back, I'm quite disappointed, because I'm thinking, you know, it was nice, but what I experienced here did not relate to the power of the urge to go there. So we're going away. It's a piercing hot Peruvian day, which is an important thing to say at this point. I've got a big red nose to prove it, and there's not a cloud in the sky. So we're going away about 3 minutes down the road from the Siyustani. I'm looking in out of the window, and I'm looking at this mound, right? I look at this mound, and this one I got the second clear voice of the three I've ever had. This mound is going, come to me, come to me, come to me. What? So what I did, as I told the bus driver to stop, I said, I want to go up that mound. I'm going to be a few minutes. Well, I thought I would be, and I was about an hour and a half. Because when I got up to the top of the mound, I couldn't see it from the road. There's this circle of standing stones, like a mini Stonehenge, obviously been there a long time. They're about that high off the ground, about just over waist height. I'm thinking, this is interesting. And I'm still trying to work out, come to me, what's going on? So I then go into the center of this circle, and I'm looking back at Siyustani across the way, distant mountains behind that. And suddenly I got the feet again, only this time and then some. And my feet were being pulled to the ground, like electromagnets were pulling them to the ground. And then I felt this like drill going in the top of my head, and I'm going, oh my God. And then my arms went up like that in the air. Now, if you put your arms like that, you know, I mean, mine are already starting to ache now. You know, a minute, you're thinking, mine were like that for at least an hour as I was working out later. Never felt a thing until it was over, and then agony, you know. Anyway, so I'm standing there like that, and I haven't thought, I'm going to put my arms in the air. There we go. And they just went, what? And then I got the third of the three voices I've ever heard, and this was the clearest. and appeared to be the most ridiculous. It said, "It will be over when you feel the rain." What? Not a cloud in the sky, piercing hot Peruvian day. So anyway, this drill in the top of my head, I could feel a flow going into the top of my head, down through my feet, and another one coming up through my feet and out through my head. You know, I'm standing there, and it's getting more and more powerful, and I'm starting to shake like I'm plugged into the mains. And after a while, because it's like driving a car, and you know, you after a couple of miles or so, you think, oh, I don't remember the last couple of miles. It was like that, in, out, in, out. And one of the ins, I noticed that over the distant mountains, there was a light grey mist suddenly. And then it got darker, and I thought, it's bloody raining. And this storm came out of these mountains so fast, it was ridiculous. It covered the sky with clouds. The sun went in. And when this front, which moved so fast out of the mountains, was above my head, it started to rain. And when the rain hit me, it was just like someone had flicked a switch off. This flow of energy just stopped. I staggered forward, my legs were like jelly, and my shoulders and my arms were agony. It seems to me that this energy hit me, particularly on that mound in Peru, and my consciousness is going, what the friggin' hell is this? And it was all over the place until the calm came, but in a higher level. And it was in that, oh my goodness me, what planet's this? I went on primetime chat shows, so it was hilarious. I mean, I didn't know what my bloody name was half the time. But then, when that was over, which attracted even more massive ridicule, of course, to give me the experience of freeing myself from the fear of what other people thought, suddenly everything came into focus. And I looked around at the same world, the same situations, but I saw a completely different landscape of what was going on. And from then, I started the journey to now.
How did you first discover the hidden agenda of the Illuminati?
Well, it was a trickle to start with. It's kind of interesting that, you know, if you talk to people who are researching this manipulation, you'll find that they all came into this area of understanding from a completely different perspective. What happened to me is that when I started this spiritual journey in the early 1990s, I had lived a life, a very out there life. I had been a journalist. I had been a television presenter. I'd been a soccer player. I'd been right out there. And yet, this spiritual knowledge, which I was now learning about, I knew nothing about. So I asked myself the question, why is this knowledge not freely available? So I started looking at the suppression of spiritual knowledge and why it was that we didn't know about interdimensional reality, that we didn't know what there was to know about our consciousness and its relationship to the body, rather than the body being what we are. And when I got into that, I started to follow a trail, and the trail got wider and wider and wider and wider. And I started to see that all these apparently independent conspiracies and institutions of control and imposition were actually connected. And it was one gigantic web with a spider in the center of it, orchestrating it. So it was first of all trying to find out why spiritual knowledge is suppressed. And then it just led to everything else. And funnily enough, all these years later, the very foundation, as I said in my talk in Vancouver, the very foundation of the conspiracy is still the suppression of that spiritual knowledge that got me in here to start with. The suppression of knowledge that we are multidimensional infinity, that we have infinite potential to control our own destiny if we understand how to do it. And of course, if you want to control billions of people, and there's not many of you, then suppressing that knowledge is essential. You've got to get people to believe they are ordinary, powerless, and basically irrelevant non-entities. Just Joe Public-mate, what can I do? And then they're controllable. So when you look at the history, which I'm writing about, as well as the modern stuff, you find that the reason that this network, which controlled the arrival and the occupation by the European nations of the Americas and South Africa and Australia and other places. The reason when those European nations went into these countries, they destroyed the ancient knowledge, they destroyed the native knowledge as much as they could. As a friend of mine in South Africa, a Zulu shaman, said they milked the minds of the shaman and then killed him, is because they had to destroy vestiges, as much as they could, of what the native peoples knew about the true history of the world and what they knew about the true nature of who we are and the nature of life. So this Illuminati network could, from Europe, create an illusion of history and an illusion of who we are, to disconnect us from essential knowledge through which we can express the full magnitude of who we all are.
And the entire witch trials then had nothing to do with eliminating Satanism. It had to do with eliminating the true knowledge of who we were through, and disconnecting us with the universe through massive acts of terrorism, and here too against the native people,
well,
residential schools.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've learned many things, but one key thing I've learned is when the forces that control information and write history want me to look over there, I instinctively look over there. And when you do a bit more research into these witch trials, you find that those who were accusing these people of Satanism were themselves Satanists. And the people they were accusing were those in that community who had realized that they were Satanists and what was going on. And so they just reverse it, and then they create a situation in which the opposition is removed. And, this has happened all over the world. One of the things that you can follow with these Illuminati and the bloodlines through which they operate, from ancient Babylon to literally today, and some of the most famous people in the world, is that satanic ritual, what we call satanic ritual, and blood drinking and human sacrifice has been an absolute fundamental part of their modus operandi all the way through, and there has to be a reason for this. What people tell me is that these particular bloodlines, and there's not that many of them at this level, they are the result of the interbreeding of a reptilian race thousands and thousands of years ago with the mammal-based human race. And the splicing of the DNA combination means that these particular bloodlines, and like I say, there's not many at this level, can actually move between reptilian and human form. And what they're doing, I understand from people who've been on the inside, is that they have the ability to open the mammal codes in the DNA and manifest as a human form while they're operating in mainstream society, and then switch back to their base form, which is a reptilian form, when they are in a position where they can do so without being identified. What's happening more and more, it seems, and I think it's to do with the vibrational change on the planet, which is increasingly being monitored, is they're finding it more and more difficult to hold those mammal codes open and manifest in human form. And more people, I know from my own experience, are seeing this shape shift, this move from one form to another. And from what the people on the inside tell me, and it's a number of different people now, for some reason, if they drink human blood, mammal blood, it helps them enormously. In fact, it seems to be almost essential to keep these mammal codes open so that they can hold human form in among the general public. And so it makes sense of why wherever you follow these bloodlines I'm identifying, from ancient Babylon to today, blood drinking and human sacrifice goes with them. And if people knew some of the famous people that are into this stuff, it will make their hair curl. Or if it's curly, it'll make it straight.
Well, why don't we have a look at some of these famous people and what their practices are?
Well, the one that comes up more than any other in relationship to shape-shifting and pedophilia and this ritual is George Bush. George Bush is one of these bloodlines that goes back to the ancient world. He is related to the Queen of England, and the British royal family were massively involved in this. And interestingly, when you look at the history of the Bush family, you're looking at so much of the history in the 20th century of the Illuminati network. His father, Prescott Bush, was one of the funders of Hitler. Prescott Bush was a major executive in the Harriman Empire, which also was the major funder in the first half of this century of the eugenics race purity movement. And the Rockefellers are massively connected into the Harrimans also, and it was the Rockefellers who funded a guy called Dr. Ernst Rudin, who had a whole floor of a university in Germany before the last war, who was Hitler's race purity expert. And the Harrimans brought him over to New York to a eugenics conference just before the war and gave him a major eugenics award for his work in Germany. And of course, it manifested as the race purity belief of the Nazis.
What can we do about this?
Well, you see, for me, there's two ways of approaching something that you want to change. One is to find a solution for it, which normally makes things worse. And the other thing is removing the cause of the problem, which I think is infinitely more wise. And the cause of the problem is that humanity has allowed itself not just to become a herd of sheep, but also a herd of sheep that's policing itself. You can only, if there's not many of you and you want to manipulate billions, you can only do it if you get the billions to keep each other in order. As I was saying in the talk in Vancouver, if people want to give their minds away to the imposed norms that are foisted upon them through the education system and the media and what have you, and they want to not question what they're told is reality, not question how they're told to behave, then that's a choice, and it's a choice they have a right to make. That doesn't make it possible or easy for a few to control the world. It just makes it easier. The Rubicon that's crossed, the point that's crossed, which allows a few to control the world relatively easily once you have control of certain institutions and flows of information, is when those who have given their minds away to norms insist that those that wish to break away from norms don't do so.
Good evening and welcome to the show. I'm Brian Peterson, and today we've got the second part of an interview with David Icke, author of The Biggest Secret, purportedly one of the most controversial books ever written. Welcome, David.
Thank you.
Now, you've had a really rough ride since you've been in Canada on this trip. A lot of accusations have been thrown around that you're an anti-Semite.
Oh, sorry, I'm just going to nod off, Brian. I want me a sec. You know?
Well, people are interested. Are you, in fact, an anti-Semite?
No. One of the books they're complaining about is one called And the Truth Shall Set You Free, which is was actually funded into existence by a Jewish friend of mine, David Solomon, from Liverpool, England. It was edited by Sarah Benjamin Rhodes from Santa Fe, who was brought up as in a Jewish family. And the fact is that what I'm exposing, a great part of what I'm exposing, is that Nazism did not end in 1945. It just removed its jackboots and its uniforms and put business suits on. One of the things that I expose, for instance, in one of the books they're complaining about, is that race purity movement did not end in 45 with Hitler. It's continued today. The same people who were funding the eugenics race purity movement in the first half of this century were the same people who launched and have funded population control. Population control is now just another name, not in every case, but certainly in its core motivation through organizations like Planned Parenthood, is just another organization for race purity. And if you look at the programs, the people they want to reduce in the world invariably have black faces or not white faces. And also, as I point out in my books, there is no group of people who have been more mercilessly abused by this manipulation than Jewish people. I mean, just look at Germany and other occasions through history. So It's a nonsense. In fact, it's the reverse of what I'm saying. And perhaps rather than focusing on just that, people might turn their attention to the people who are saying something that is quite obviously nonsense and ask what their agenda is and why they're saying something that's so blatantly untrue.
Well, at your talk yesterday at the Vogue, demonstrators were outside from the Green Party passing out an informational leaflet saying that you're using discredited sources for some of the statements that you're making, and they mention in particular the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Mm-hmm. This is claimed to be a discredited document.
Well, let's look at what I'm saying about the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. First of all, they say that I'm basing my research and my idea of conspiracy on them. That is, well, I mean, I'm almost speechless, which is very rare for me. I probably mentioned them about 6 times in the last 2 books, which total 1,000 pages, and most of those mentions are explaining how they were handed to Hitler. I actually renamed them the Illuminati Protocols to get away from this Jewish emphasis. And I also point out one simple thing, that's all. Whoever wrote them, and whatever the background, and I don't know what that is, they tell the story of the 20th century before the 20th century started. And if anyone wants to read that document and then look at what's happened in this century, they will see that the two correlate. And, you know, people talk about the need for a free flow of information, but what they mean is the free flow of information they want to hear. Now, people are frightened of freedom. I hear the Christian patriots say they want to replace the New World Order and the centralization of global power with freedom, but when you talk to them enough, they want to replace it with a Christian-based country, one nation under God. They don't want freedom. They want to replace a dictatorship they don't like with a dictatorship they do. And the reason that I unite all hierarchies, whether it's Islamic, because you see, when I'm in South Africa, they don't call me anti-Jewish, they call me anti-Islam. And you know, the Christians in America don't like me too much when I'm talking about some of the stuff that they are putting around. I'm challenging all hierarchies because I'm challenging the imposition of another's view on other people. And what's interesting is that I unite in condemnation various groups who on any other issue would be vehemently opposing each other. And yet at the same time, in the audience at the Vogue in Vancouver, were people from all these different belief systems in the audience. I'm trying to point out that all hierarchies operate the same. I don't care if it's a Jewish hierarchy or a Christian hierarchy or an Islamic hierarchy or a far-right hierarchy or a far-left hierarchy, or a Green Party hierarchy, and I've seen the hierarchy within the leaderless bloody Greens. I'll tell you, I was in the British Green Party. Crikey, talk about handbags at 10 paces with the greatest respect to women. I mean, you know, it's unbelievable. And I'm just pointing out that they might have a different name on the door, a different dress on, but all hierarchies operate the same.
You say some very grotesque things about some of our world and business leaders, that they're Satanists, that they engage in pedophilia, child sacrifice. How is it that you haven't had your ass sued off?
Well, that's an interesting thing. I mean, there was a presenter on 1040 who had a diatribe about me and said, I can't understand why this man hasn't been sued and all this stuff. Well, if it is possible for him to engage some brain cell activity, he might ask the question, could what is being said possibly be true? And therefore, no one's going to want to go to court with it. I named, for instance, Brian, a guy called Ted Heath, who was the British Prime Minister between 70 and 74, a guy that took us into the European spider's web and has pressed right to the present day for us to go further and further into it. So, you know, national laws in Britain have no meaning if European law says something different. And, you know, I have a simple philosophy. If it's true, let's say it. If it's not true, we shouldn't dream of saying it. And enough people have told me of their experiences with Ted Heath for me to pass the line where I would go public with it. And I talked to him about him and the biggest secret being a pedophile, being a child murderer, a torturer of children, and a Satanist. And a journalist went to him, and this is last 13 months ago, and read from the book and said, what are you saying about this guy? What was your reaction? And he said, I just think David Icke must be ill. That guy could have shut that book down, not a problem, but he had to go to court to do it. And he's a very rich man, he's a wealthy man. It's not the money that would have stopped him doing it. But they haven't. No one's gone to court. I'm talking about Mohammed Al-Fayed in there, making key decisions without which the crash in the Pont d'Alma tunnel with Diana, Princess of Wales, could not have happened. Al-Fayed hands out libel suits in Britain like bloody confetti. You know, not a line, not a word, not a reaction. And it's the same wherever I go. And I talk about George Bush, but you see, it's not just me talking about George Bush. There's a book called Transformation of America that has massively exposed what George Bush did to the author of the book. That's been circulating in Canada, where she also mentions Pierre Trudeau and Brian Mulroney, and it's circulating in America now for getting on for 10 years. The copies have been sent to all the people mentioned in the book. Copies have been sent to congressional committees and key people in the government, to all the media. John W. DeKemp, a former state senator in Nebraska, wrote a book called The Franklin Cover-Up, in which he was investigating the scam to defraud the Franklin Savings and Loans Bank for $40 million by a guy called Lawrence King, who was a major Republican. He sang the national anthem at the Republican conventions in '84 and '88, and he went to jail for that embezzlement. During the investigation, DeKemp uncovered that actually Lawrence King was running a pedophile ring in Nebraska, which involved the head of the local police in Omaha, Nebraska, which involved the owner of the local newspapers and the local radio output, etc., etc. And he also established that George Bush, again, was one of the people who came across and took advantage, shall we say, of this paedophile ring that was providing boys and girls for these people. And on it goes. There's another book just come out called Thanks for the Memories by another woman who is talking out about her experiences, who should be mentioned in that book in terms of what was done to her and what was done to her child, George Bush. And this is why they don't want to go to court. I mean, you know, if it's not true, I shouldn't be saying it. But if it is true, can someone please start thinking about the children who are being abused now as we speak, rather than running away in denial?
The mainstream media generally doesn't touch you unless it is to, you know, stick a selection of cutlery in your bag.
You're right, Brian, that's true.
So talk a little bit about the top-down structure, the pyramid structure that seems to permeate all our major institutions. Why is it useful?
Well, you see, there's this idea, you know, people say to me, you can't get over human nature, mate. Well, I think the nature of humans is actually, if left to its, if you like, unmanipulated form, I think the nature of humans is a wondrous thing. And, you know, we have wars all over the place, but how many people want wars, you know? I mean, generally people just want to get on with their lives. We're looking at manipulated human nature, not human nature in its natural form, I think. So, therefore, if many people knew about what was going on, it wouldn't be going on. So there had to be a structure created whereby vast numbers of people could, with their daily behavior and their daily work, be advancing an agenda they know nothing about. Otherwise, the agenda wouldn't be advanced. So what was created, and this is where you see in all the institutions, indeed, of virtually every organization in the world, is the structure of a pyramid, a compartmentalized pyramid, very much like a secret society. At the top of the pyramid in any organization, you've got the people who know what the motivation and agenda of that organization is. It don't matter if it's a transnational company, a bank, or a government. As you come down from that peak, and those few who know how everything fits together, you meet more and more and more people who know less and less about what the organization's agenda is. They're just coming in, they're playing their part, they earn their money, they go home, they want to see their families grow up. You know, they're not trying to run the world. You go quite high up this pyramid before you meet anyone that's kind of knowingly involved here. And then you have this structure like, you know, like Russian dolls, one doll inside another. It's pyramids inside pyramids. A bank compartmentalized pyramid goes into another pyramid, and eventually you've got the global banking system pyramid. And at the top of that are a few people. A transnational corporation is a compartmentalized pyramid. It goes into the transnational global network, and at the top of that you've got a few people, and they're the same few people at the top of the banking pyramid, and so it goes on. You know, it's very rarefied atmosphere up there. You keep coming across the same names all the time. And a lot of these people, they stay out of the public domain. I mean, if you're at the level of a president or a prime minister, you might be knowingly involved, like George Bush or Bill Clinton or George W. Bush, who's trying to become the president now. But you're still small fry compared with those that are string pulling it. The people really behind this, they're not going to put themselves out in the public arena and say, here I am, identify me, I'm a target. They put people in front to do that. So, for instance, the idea that the President of the United States is the most powerful man in the world, I mean, that's just hilarious. I mean, it's like a comedy show, nothing like he is. And this pyramidal system means that vast numbers of people are advancing an agenda they don't even know exists, because someone down here in a bank doesn't know how what they're doing connects in with what someone in the military is doing here, or someone in a transnational corporation here, or someone in a government here. The only people that know how that fits together, and therefore the direction that the world's being pushed, are the people at the top. And without that, it couldn't happen, you know, because it really is, you know, if too many people knew, the thing would fall apart.
One of the people you mentioned quite a bit is Conrad Black.
Yeah.
One of my least favorite people.
Mm-hmm.
He owns a multitude of newspapers in this country. You had some interesting things to say about the Hollinger Corporation that he's the head of. Could you recount some of those things?
Well, this is interesting, Brian, see, because while people stand around, and they have every right to, denying there's any conspiracy and denying that, you know, this stuff's going on, all they have to do is open their eyes. I mean, the very idea that, I think someone told me recently, 68% of newspapers and growing in Canada are owned by Conrad Black. I mean, the potential for the suppression of information to Canadians, which might wake Canadians up to what's really going on, is absolutely enormous when you do that. Like the television networks in America, people think they're free because there's 3 television networks. Well, what if the same force controls all 3? And the Hollinger group appears to have evolved out of a operation that was created during the last war by the Special Operations Executive of British Intelligence, which put up a front organization called War Supplies Limited, which was run by a guy called Edward Plunkett Taylor. He actually later wrote the banking laws for the Cayman Islands, and a guy called George Montague Black. And after the war, it changed its name to Argus and then became Hollinger. And Conrad Black, who is a major operator within the Illuminati at the level he's at, a major inner circle member of one of their operational groups called the Bilderberg Group, is the son of the guy who helped to set the whole thing up. And again, people have told me of the British intelligence connection, not just to the Canadian media, but to the American media, because in the end, the center of the Illuminati operation, at operational level, there are other centers around the world as well, is the City of London. And so people think, because the British Empire has apparently faded, that the control from England is over, but the epicenter at the center of the secret society network, the web, is the City of London, and they will be pulling the strings of Canada far more than anyone living here.
On top of this level of elite control that encompasses the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission, and several other organizations, it's your theory that alien reptilian species that is bred with humans occupies that level above on the pyramid?
Well, all I can do, like anybody else who's researching and reporting what they research, is to report what evidence there is of that. From all over the world, I've met people who have told me about having the experience. These are people not from within the Illuminati web, but outside of it, first of all, who have had this experience of seeing people, particularly in positions of power, but certainly not always, change into a reptilian figure in front of them and then go back to human. When you look at the ancient accounts, like the Nagas, the ancient gods of the Indus Valley, they said about them that they could take either human or reptilian form. Then you look at what people within the Illuminati, who have been within the Illuminati web and come out. Stuart Swerdlow, who's written a number of books, was one of the victims of the mind control operation at Montauk, which again a number of books have been written. A lot of books have been written in recent years, and he talks about the fact that they are a reptilian group that are at the head of the Illuminati, and that they interbred a long time ago. He says around 200,000 years ago the whole thing started moving with humanity, and they created hybrid bloodlines with part mammal and part reptilian DNA, and that certain bloodlines at the top, not many of them, have the ability to switch between their mammal DNA form and their reptilian DNA form, which is their kind of base form, and therefore they have the ability to appear human when out in the world, and yet they are reptilian in truth behind that. When I met Princess Diana's closest confidant, Christine Fitzgerald, in Britain, I went to talk to her about the horrendous treatment of Diana by the Windsors. And as the conversation unfolded, she said to me, do you know what Diana's nickname for the Windsors was? And I said, I don't know. Well, she said it was the lizards and the reptiles. She said, and she used to say in all seriousness, they're not human. And she went on to tell me that because this lady works as a healer with the British aristocracy and lower levels of the royal family, and she said, you know, they're a reptilian bloodline. They're a reptilian hybrid bloodline. And there's a lady called Arizona Wilder, formerly called Jennifer Green, who used to conduct sacrificial rituals for people like the British royal family and top people in America, who I went to see her, not to talk about reptilians, but to talk about the sacrificial rituals. And she told me about the stuff and what the Windsors get up to, and this has come from other sources also. And that was astonishing enough. And then as the conversation unfolded, she said to me, but that's not the most amazing thing that happened. And I'm thinking, crikey, what's coming next, you know? And she said, when the blood starts to flow in the rituals, the British royal family turn into reptiles. They shapeshift into reptiles, and so do, you know, people like George Bush and other people who she names, Al Gore and many other people. And there was absolutely no contact whatsoever or no knowledge of the existence between Christine Fitzgerald in London, Princess Diana's confidant for 9 years, and acknowledged as such in the media before her death, and this lady who literally lives in California. And you add the layers and the layers on top of each other, and you find that you know, there's some massive evidence to support the fact that there's a massive case to answer here, and there's a lot more to know. I've got more questions than anybody, but again and again, the bloodlines, the same bloodlines, end up in the positions of power. And then when you go back into the ancient world far enough, you pick up the endless accounts wherever you go. Even the Old Testament in the Bible carries one version of it, which is of a race of gods interbreeding with humanity, creating hybrid bloodlines. In Genesis, it talks about the sons of God, which in the original it was translated from says sons of the gods, interbred with the daughters of men, creating a hybrid race called the Nephilim. Other accounts, like the Sumerian tablets that were found in 1850 and buried, it's estimated about 2000 BC, in what we now call Iraq, telling the story of the ancient Sumer culture, which even conventional history says is at least one of the cradles of civilization, very advanced for its time. They talk of a race of gods they call the Anunnaki, which in Sumerian apparently means those who from heaven to earth came, interbreeding with humanity, creating hybrid bloodlines. And it even talks and shows a pictorial version of the fact that the first interbreeding was done by what we call today test tube methods. And these Sumerian tablets say that these hybrids between human and this Anunnaki were put into positions of ancient ruling royal power in Sumer and Egypt and that area of the world, Babylon. And it's interesting that when you do the genealogy, and again, it's a painstaking job, but there's enough been done already to take these bloodlines that rule the world today, that end up as presidents and business leaders and all these, and the British royal family and the aristocracy of Europe, back to those same ruling royal families, which these ancient tablets say the hybrid people were put into. And it's interesting that, you know, this strange thing, when you go back, two things. First of all, these bloodlines, right the way through the present day, these ruling families, they interbreed like crazy. And, you know, you think on the face of it, as I did as a kid, oh, they're just bloody snobs. But then you realize, as the research unfolds, that what they're actually doing is trying to hold a genetic structure, a DNA structure, that is different to most of the rest of us. And also you've got this thing about the divine right to rule. I mean, where the hell did that come from? Whereby certain bloodlines had the right to be kings and queens throughout history because the divine God, it was said, gave them that right. But you start to realize that the divine right to rule actually had nothing to do with the divine. All that is, it had to do with gods, not God. And it's funny, just to finish the point, when you look at the ceremony that the British monarch goes through at Westminster Abbey to become king or queen, if you replace God with gods, it tells the whole friggin' story.
We've just got a couple minutes left.
Yeah.
We can rapidly see, if we look around, we're moving to a state in the world where there'll soon be a one world government, a single currency,
right,
a world police force, and you say a microchipped population.
It's already starting.
And yet, you say this is a great time to be alive.
Right.
What is the significance of the year 2012, and why is it a good time to be alive?
Well, see, one of the things, Brian, we go back to what I said in the first half of this interview, the first half that was done. In the end, the spiritual nature of human beings is both the key to how we've been suppressed, i.e. suppressing our knowledge of who we are, and it's also the key to how we can become free, which is understanding the true magnitude of who we are. And it's very clear, to me anyway, and many increasing numbers of people, that there are cycles through which this planet goes through, and they are cycles of energy. And there are certain cycles which act like alarm clocks. They wake us up. I mean, the Mayans talked about these cycles, and one of their great cycles, which I think it started in 3113, is due to end in 2012. And the idea is that this particular cycle, as it comes to an end, brings to the surface all that's remained hidden, so we can move into another level of understanding. And certainly the evidence is increasing that from about 1986, something called Schumann cavity resonance, which was discovered in 1899, the base resonant frequency, the heartbeat, if you like, of the planet has suddenly started increasing. It was pretty stable from when it was discovered in 1899 to 1986, and it's got faster and faster the longer the years have gone on. Now, what this has corresponded with, quite demonstrably, I've been in 25 countries in 3.5 years, and I've seen it everywhere, is that more and more people are suddenly waking up and they're seeing the world in a different way. They have a different understanding of themselves. They are perceiving the world in a different way. I mean, crikey, 1,200 people in the Vogue Theatre to hear about shape-shifting reptilians. My goodness me. I mean, are we moving on in terms of people's minds opening to all possibility or not? I know Vancouver's, in my opinion, the most open-minded city in the world, but even here, to get that number to look at this information as enthusiastically as they did, and the reaction I get from the website and the books, some things are changing. And I think over the next few years, the veil is going to lift not only on what's going on in the world, but one reflection of that, and one cause of that is the veil over our eyes is also lifting. And I think it's a wonderful time to be alive, and I think what's being exposed and the control is in its death throes, and it's going to happen quicker if we know it exists.
Well, that's just about all the time we have left.
Thank you.
You've given us a lot of food for thought, David.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for being on the
Pleasure,
show.
Brian. Thank you.
David Icke, author of The Biggest Secret and several other books. Thanks very much for being here.
Thanks,
Good night.
Brian.